trying to get you folks to understand this is how the smoke and mirrors works. I just simply want to find out what happened to the American dream as someone who is living the American nightmare. You got to know the facts, and if we came together, we could overcome the corruption that's murdering us all.
I'm just trying to make the world aware of the truth, and I've got it.
And I'm slightly overwhelmed. I'm also encouraged, but at the same time, I'm not sure what year it is sometimes, because, as we approach really, I think, the most important time period in the calendar of the fiscal of the year, and really maybe the most important time of this journey, is that for me, rebirth is extremely important. The opportunity to begin again, and we've just reached over 1.1 million people on hashtag Patrick Lovell, and I think collectively on the hashtags what we put out there, about 4.4 million people. And I'm getting contacted by people all over the country, many of whom I've known and I haven't talked to for a long time, and many that are finding their way to us through these sermons as they are on TikTok. And it's quite amazing because of a lot of convergence of things that are happening right now. And I hope that in the spirit of the season, so to speak, that maybe we are on the precipice of our own version of what history's given us a few times. So I think I'll take you down the journey of my corollary and where I am currently in this process. So when I personally got just destroyed by the meat grinder of the foreclosure process back in, let's call it, I'm going to say 2009, 2010 was that process. It was pretty much 2008 through the late 2010. In fact, we got foreclosed on Christmas time, 2010, which was really horrific. And as a business guy and trying to salvage what I could and trying to read what was happening out there, in the general media with the Obama administration at the time, talking about programs through the Home Affordable Modification Program and my real experience dealing with servicers, and also coming from the background of being a business guy and working with creditors on occasion to be able to maneuver things, to be able to withstand the business cycle or billing as it is when you're independent. And I kind of knew how things worked before that, but they certainly were a different deal in this time period that I'm talking about. And I started to discover patterns that after a while I was like, wait a second, this is a setup. And so ultimately, I started pulling the thread from there, and then that's what led to this amazing adventure. That it was an odyssey that from beginning to now is 13 years. And 13 was a big number in my life because long before that, this goes back to late mid 90s, to be honest with you. For some reason, 13 kept popping up in my life. And I'd wake up at 5:13 a.m. I'd have to get somewhere important. I don't know if you've ever had an experience where, something just starts popping up on your radar and you start noticing it. Well, that happened to be the case for me. And I started kind of looking into 13 and, kind of understanding the entire history of why we think 13 is bad luck. And then all of the other actually very interesting, sorts of variables that go into really what constitute the number 13, which is a very powerful number. And, as I went through that process, and I literally went through that process long before anything happened in 2009, and I discovered that 13 means a couple of things that are important to me. It means, on one hand, the 13 principles of God, kind of a guiding process of decisions that we make in our life based on integrity and based on the commitment to, good above evil, right? I mean, really, that's what it comes down to live a good life. And it also means balance and the harmony of kind of like the celestial scope of things. So 13 is a number that always seems to mean, some sort of balance, which is incredible. But as I got down further into my understanding of 13 throughout history, 13 was very prevalent in the American colonies prior to the American Revolution. And as you'll see on the dollar bill and all of the other sort of, the metaphors that 13 had been instilled within the colonies, 13 is all over the dollar bill, for example. It's 13 levels of the pyramids. It's all to the all-seeing eye, which is wisdom. And then, of course, there's 13, talons in the eagle's, talon, 13 arrows in the eagle's talon. And, it's just all over the place. And so what it also means is revolution. So again, to kind of reconfigure, it means the principles of God, balance in the universe, and revolution. We got, Friday the 13th, and, the mystique of bad luck came from when the guys that were on the Crusades, it's just on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, I'll come back to it. The Masons, or the Freemasons, okay? They ultimately configured a challenge to the crown of France, which was in cohesion with the Catholic Church at that time, and that's why we call it the Roman Catholic Empire, right? And the king and the Pope got wind of kind of this new system that was challenging their power through, lending, and because these guys were the ones who ultimately became the Masons that built all of the churches in the cities around Europe at that time period, and so because the Masons were a threat to their power, their central power, they decided on Friday the 13th to basically betray them, and they murdered all of the return, guys from the Crusades that ultimately were part of this configuration, and they did that on Friday the 13th. So that's why we get, bad luck is 13. But interestingly enough, it was that time period that seemed to evolve that ultimately wound up on our shores. So really, you can kind of paint, the Odyssey is from Moses, literally, to the Crusades, to Western Europe and the Masons, to the United States. And when you undergird all of this, in fact, a lot of, the other part of this equation in the deep dive kind of strange mysticism is the Illuminati and all that stuff. But I think that stuff came from, quite frankly, the crown, that there was this, secret kind of cabal of people that were, in play to challenge the power. Well, they were. I mean, ultimately, I wouldn't say they were the Rothschilds, which is where people go. They were free men trying to, through the Masons and the engineering, the architecture, and the Renaissance, and all of those kind of things, create an alternative to central power, which ultimately gave birth to democracy. That's the way I see it. Now, don't hold me to that because I'm not an expert. This is just kind of like, a guy searching for things over the course of time, just, as background to what I'm doing. But I found it interesting because 13 was something that was very integral in my life long before all of this happened. So in 2008, 9, 10, when I'm going through all this madness, I start to pull the threads of all this stuff, and I start to realize, wait a second, this is a concerted scheme within the system of the servicers and foreclosure mills and the courts and the states and the government and everything else, that it all seems to be interlocked in a way that they were doing something that was just the opposite of what they were telling us. And I'm the kind of person that if someone gives me a red flag, I tend to want to understand what it is they're doing and why. And that's what I did. And I'm relentless when it comes to that. So I started pulling the threads. Next thing you know, I got a chance to be able to make my first documentary, which was called Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream. And because I'm a film guy, I'm a producer, I've been that guy for a long time, I always kind of thought of myself as Uma Thurman in Pulp Fiction when John Travolta stuck the adrenaline shot in her chest to wake up from the heroin comatose to be like in the game, right? And so that was kind of the metaphor in my mind. And that was kind of Forward 13 for me, premised in everything that I just told you. So, the principles of God through balance of the universe, through ultimately revolution. And what we found in Forward 13, which was my first lap around the country, which we started during the time of Occupy Wall Street. We went to 23 different encampments, and then the Tea Party popped up, and we were all over the country. And I'll never forget going to the belly of the beast. I went to the Americans for Prosperity headquarters in Kansas, and it was odd because there was this corollary to, the Wizard of Oz on our journey. And I remember going to the Wizard of Oz Museum after that, and those two things were happening at the same time, and I realized, these Americans for Prosperity would have been like the Bad Witch. I mean, I can always make metaphors based on corollaries to, fictional depictions of what happened in our world. And this one was one in real time. And I'll never forget talking to the head guy at Americans for Prosperity. This guy was like, just aw shucks, of the people sort of, farmer guy, yeah, with a PhD from Harvard. You know what I mean? So the Koch brothers just put the best and the brightest, and this guy was working me left and right, and I kept going, well, wait a second. Everything he was saying was kind of antithetical to the common sense, and I knew right then he was pissing on my head telling me it was rain. And so, for me, the other corollary to films that came from the 90s, of which I come from too as a filmmaker, is, of course, the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist, and then ultimately, I got tired of them pissing on my head telling me it was rain, because they must have thought I was some kind of new fool. Why is all of that relevant? Because I'm getting people from all over the country, and I have been literally for about 11 years now. What do we do next? How do we do this? What are we going to do? Once we have the facts, what are we supposed to do? And this has been the question over and over, because the power, literally, whether it's the Wall Street meritocracy, Ivy League Democrats, right, which I consider the deep state. Literally, there's extremely organized, brilliant people that control the system. They literally do, because they are the smartest people in our system, honestly. But they work for themselves. That's when we've become what my colleague wrote when we first started this was kind of a treatise called The New Aristocracy. And that means that these people are above the law. Well, because they make the laws. And along the journey, we learned from this great French libertarian philosopher, Bastiat, that when a group of men discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it. That's what's happened throughout history. It's just a repeat of history. And so we're at a moment now in our generation, the people that have come through this crisis process, I'm pleading to you to come out of your shell, to come out of all of the pain and suffering that you have experienced throughout this entire time, to join us, because everybody is asking, what do we do? I've got the answers, okay? And for some reason, I am the only one willing to bring them to you. And it's not me telling you that the system is corrupt or the system is rigged. It's me showing you with the evidence that we took years and years to aggregate all over this country, and we did the work that the Department of Justice, the FBI, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and all of the major media of this country, New York Times, all of the big papers, all of the big platforms, failed to do. Now, there's a lot of reasons that happened, but I think primarily, if I have an overgirding theory, is it's a confluence of two things. That A, we don't have a lot of bandwidth because everybody's chasing the cycle. So everybody tries to get eyeballs in the moment, but yet they lose sight of what's actually going on, and they don't ask the right questions because, quite frankly, investigative journalism, as I've learned personally, and it's been very painful in this process, takes a long time. You can't click your heel 3 times and get to the truth. And quite frankly, what I've known my entire life, because I am an action sports guy and I played sports my whole life, there are no shortcuts to success. You do not climb the mountain and get to the peak without pain or without risk. And those are things that make getting to the top of the mountain worthwhile. So I already had that baked into my DNA long before I had to go through this incredibly painful process. And so I'm a family guy, and family is really the most important thing to me aside from the truth. And I put a lot of risk into this whole thing, and I got lucky, and I was able to find a way to be able to find the resources to get paid to go do all of this stuff, because that's what I do, because I'm a producer, I'm a muckraker journalist, and I'm also a business guy, and I'm an entrepreneur, which makes me a guy that likes to compete. But I was able to go and put all of these things together, and I did. But it's such a loud, overwhelming universe, then it's like, then you got to go to the next step. And and people question my sanity. People who are in my circle, how much is worth it? I mean, you're going through a divorce. Your son is, the thing that matters to you most, and he's upside down, inside out, trying to discover what he's supposed to do as a 17-year-old after COVID and after all of these personal problems, and he's a mess. He doesn't have, the balance. He doesn't have the sort of architecture to be able to, be safe, go to school, learn, go to college, move on to the next thing, because everything's in chaos for us at the moment. And I know there's millions of you like that. So as we approach this incredibly important time, right, I've done these hashtags over and over, and I want you to just understand you have to join us, because if you have endured suffering, if you have endured being betrayed by the system, and you've had everything stolen from you, and maybe you've gone through the same type of suffering I have, where you felt like you were drowning the whole time, where your lips are barely above water, where you've lost everything in the process that was important to you, and now you just feel defeated and you want to give up, maybe you even want to die. That's what this moment in time signifies, and we have to come together. So the great story of Exodus, right? What was Moses about? What were the Israelites escaping? Well, they were under the burden of the pharaohs. They were slaves, and they were seeking liberation. And Moses came, and he was the deliverer. And Moses did so in a way that they didn't want to be saved in the moment. You remember the corollary from the story? It's like people didn't believe him, or they didn't want to go along, or they didn't want to escape for themselves. They just had found a way that the only way they're going to survive and the only system they knew was suffering. But the whole point of Exodus was, and the deliverer, was to be redeemed. And so at great cost and purpose, led by God in the parables, in the scriptures, that Moses, against all odds, found the courage to become the leader that people galvanized behind, and they went across the Red Sea. And the idea is they had to wander around the desert to get to the promised land, right? And of course, Moses couldn't get there. But that's one side of the story, but that's all about redemption. But the only thing you can do to escape, the evil of slavery, right, and bondage, is you have to have structure based on common sense, which we call God's laws, or what we call the Ten Commandments. But they're just basic laws, right? Outside of the ones that, you don't have, you can't recognize any other God but me sort of thing. But, thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not lie, and deceit, and all of those that, manifest just honesty and living a good life of value and integrity. So the other hashtag that I set forth, and I hope that everybody uses in unison with hashtag Exodus, the hashtag the resurrection. So next week we've got Passover and Easter, and it's all about rebirth, right? What is the resurrection all about? Once again, it's liberation. The journey of Jesus was to lift up the downtrodden and purge evil and corruption, is really what the story says to me, right? And then the great sacrifice, because again, most people in the flock will sin or not have the courage to move forward or make the mistakes of easy and find their place to survive within this situation rather than live boldly and freely. But the idea of resurrection is that, once again, you're liberated from this life, but if you live the good life, if you're a believer and you believe and you act within the deeds of the golden rule, then you will be redeemed. You will elevate your soul, and you will be elevated to eternity, is the idea. I don't see anything wrong with that. The notion of, okay, you live a good life, hopefully you'll be redeemed. I hope so. But again, the theme is Exodus to resurrection have the same exact themes. And so that's why we hashtag Exodus and hashtag the resurrection. But for me personally, I also hashtag failure is not an option. Because my last name is Lovell, okay? Jim Lovell was the captain of Apollo 13. And of course, that story was he and his crew members had to work through the problem and miraculously find a solution to a problem that was about to end their lives. If they didn't get all of the parts in the capsule completely reconfigured the right way, they would have the wrong trajectory and then be bounced off into space, never to be heard or seen from again. But because they're the guys with the right stuff, who live with great purpose and conviction and integrity, they had the capacity to solve problems. And so the theme here is that Exodus and resurrection is liberation, but failure is not an option. We can sort out any problem that's in front of us, especially given the stress and the pressure. If we put it together, we can find the right tools to fix the problem. And again, by the way, the corollary, 13, Lovell, I don't know. I got to tell you, man, it was always something that hit me, in my conviction, kind of like, wow, well, there's a parable I can sink my teeth into. And then ultimately, the hashtag truth is marching. So among all of the struggles in American history, one that I probably appreciate above all else is the war to purge slavery. Going back to the theme again from the very beginning, Exodus, to purge bondage, right? The Civil War. The North had to come together to fight to the death to break the chains of slavery. And we did it. Why? Because in the American Revolution, going back to the 13 original colonies, we actually purged, the autocracy or, King George III, because we wanted to be free and dynamic and a democracy. And we came up with something that was would never again be under the thumb of one evil leader. I mean, this is the themes throughout history, and this is what we are as Americans. So again, rebirth and liberation to redemption through hashtag Exodus, hashtag the resurrection, to hashtag truth is marching, because truth was our convictions. All men are created equal. And we proved it through great sacrifice of blood and treasure to prevail. And then, of course, we had problems after the fact, but none of us fought in that battle, okay? That was a previous generation that did it, and they won. And that got us to the next level, which was civil rights and moving forward and that sort of thing, and not to mention D-Day and everything that I always like to reveal as other parts of us, not to mention what that led to in terms of NASA. I mean, we've always been a country of pursuit of excellence, even though humanity is flawed, right? It's up to us now. It has to be up to us. And I'm telling you that what we're up against is the pharaohs or King George III, but the thing is you don't know it because you can't see it, because you don't understand how they came to power. You don't understand how they hijacked the system to invert, pervert, and destroy and betray everything that all of those in our history had come together to sacrifice to be able to create what we are, to give us the opportunity to vote, to live this life of freedom, to do everything else until we got destroyed by it. And it was like a 10-ton, megaton, nuclear bomb to the American dream in 2008. It's not ancient history. It's our system. You can't fight what you can't see. But I've come through this process, 13 years of sacrifice against all odds, where I've lost everything to bring this truth to you. And I am singing from the mountaintops that this will bring us together, and this will allow us to break the chains of bondage yet again. And this is the time that we have to do it. There are situations right now all over the country where people are finally coming together. I'm seeing it now in Florida and New Jersey. I've got cases in Washington and California. In the midst of all of this other stuff with Russia and Ukraine and all of these battles for the midterms and everything else, you got to understand, whether it's Obama's side of the Democratic Party, which covered this up, that led to Trump's side of this equation, and Trump has been up to this his entire career. Those are non-choices. We have got to come together as a populist movement. Everybody who believes in freedom and the dignity of Americans to live free, so that we can find our way through this life, because we've got the integrity of law and justice on our side, so that we can make our own decisions and move forward. But we right now are absolutely controlled by a diabolical financial machine that has corrupted and polluted the process. They've overrun the courts, which is the judiciary. They've overrun Congress, which is legislative. And then, of course, they own the presidency. The financial system owns everyone, but they didn't earn this money by creating a situation where everybody thrived and it was a rising tide raises all ships. No, it was smash and grab. It was looting. It was a massive criminal enterprise that destroyed tens of millions, that the courts literally allowed this insane documentation fabrication to illegally foreclose on tens of millions of people. It's playing out right now, where Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are talking, well, not Bernie Sanders, but Elizabeth Warren and Senator Sherrod Brown are once again questioning CEO of Chase, Jamie Dimon, about robo-signing as it relates to credit card debt. Look, the robo-signing madness never ended, and it wasn't just MERS. The mortgage electronic registration system has become ICE. It's just theft in a way that you can't see it. And so innocent people by the millions got set up and knocked down, and they had their property stolen, which in the United States, the pathway to the middle class mostly was through real estate. It used to be through all of the different industry that we had in the work after World War II through the 70s, but then we killed the golden goose. It is time to redeem ourselves. It is time to come together as a nation to once and for all purge corruption and redeem ourselves in the process. And who am I? I'm Patrick Lovell, and it's what I do. Onwards and upwards.
I just made a promise to myself that I was going to find the answers.